the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
And welcome back to another Warrior Creed live stream with me, the radical Majid Nawaz. And the topic for today is on your screens now. Trump kickstarts Iran-US nuclear talks, and a grand regional settlement for peace is coming. The grand regional settlement for peace element is something that regulars to the Warrior Creed live stream and radical media generally will be aware that we have been forecasting for a long time. We're going to break it all down for you in this stream, because the peace overtures that are currently ongoing between the United States of America and Iran are not restricted to the US and Iran, but also prior to that involved, of course, Afghanistan and the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. After that, the settlement of affairs in the proxy war inside Syria, proxy war between Russia and the US, of course, a Syrian civil war that was effectively a global proxy war. The negotiations ongoing between the US and Russia involving Ukraine, in addition. And of course, to wrap it all up, at the end of that will come a settlement with Israel and Palestine. But prior to Israel and Palestine, all of these other fires that we've just mentioned need to be put out. Afghanistan was dealt with. Syria has recently been dealt with. Ukraine is currently being dealt with. Iran is currently being dealt with. And then finally we'll come to the Israel-Palestine question. And what we're going to witness, it is our view, is a revived Abraham Accords peace initiative for the Israel-Palestine question, but in the context of a broader global and regional grand settlement for peace. And that's something which we hope today's show will go into some detail for you about. And we're going to kickstart this with the Iran question. As you see there, Al Arabiya reports that Iran says talks with the US to focus solely on nuclear issue lifting sanctions. Those talks that were occurring over the weekend have concluded, but they are set to resume next week after a pause of roughly 5 days. Just to read for you from that Al Arabiya report dated 13th of April 2025, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and US Middle East Envoy Steve Witkoff held talks Saturday in Muscat, which is in Oman, marking the highest level Iran-US nuclear negotiations since the collapse of a 2015 accord. They agreed to meet again in 7 days. He said the talks would only focus on the nuclear issue and the lifting of sanctions, and that Iran will not have any talks with the Americans on any other issue. That is important, that line. Before we carry on reading from the rest of this, let's just explain that, because of course what we've just said is that these talks with Iran are in the context of the regional and global conflict. We still believe that to be the case, even though the Iranians are saying it's just on their nuclear issue and on the issue of sanctions. Those two issues cannot be separated, despite what the Iranians are saying, from the regional conflicts, which we're going to come to in a moment. But just to carry on reading from the Al Arabiya report, analysts had said that the US would push to include on the agenda discussions over Iran's ballistic missile program, along with Tehran's support for the Axis of Resistance, a network of militant groups opposed to Israel. Tehran has, however, maintained that it will only talk about its nuclear program. That's, of course, where we're saying, don't worry, we are going to explain how it's still, regardless, all linked and will remain linked. But to finish reading from the full quote there we have for you, Tehran and Washington have had no diplomatic relations since shortly after Iran's 1979 Islamic Revolution that toppled the Western-backed Shah. So in that sense, these are hugely significant talks. They involve Washington and the US's first attempts to formalize relationships through obviously baby steps since, not accurate to say since the overthrow of the Shah of Iran and Khomeini's Shia Islamist revolution in Iran in 1979. There have been talks since then. Let's not forget that Obama initiated similar nuclear talks, but the joint agreement that the US and the Iranians came to was scrapped under Trump's first term in 2015 amid accusations that the Iranians were not sticking or adhering to what they had agreed on their uranium enrichment and concerns that they were developing a nuclear weapon. Trump, amidst those concerns, scrapped that deal. The Iranians, of course, cried foul and said that they had an agreement. Why did the Americans scrap it? Trump, in his second term, has reinitiated that process. How that will go. But in the meanwhile, we have had reactions from both Trump and the Iranian side. Trump's reaction seems optimistic, and we're going to play that for you now. This is President Trump after being asked about how the weekend's talks between the US and Iran went in Muscat, which is in Oman, and this is what he had to say.
I think they're going okay.
What was your
Well, I can't tell you because it doesn't. Nothing matters until you get it done. So I don't like talking about it, but it's going okay. The Iran situation is going pretty good.
Are there other talks that are going well,
I
sir?
think.
And there it was, going pretty well. He's not going to give too much information at this stage, but he said, I think it's going pretty well. That's a overall optimistic reaction from President Trump. Khamenei, who's the current supreme leader of Iran, he had, again, a very timid response, a cautious response, but nevertheless agreed that the talks did go well. He said he was neither optimistic nor pessimistic. Perhaps that means he's being realistic, but Sky News brings that report. And as you can see on your screens now, that is from today. Breaking from Sky News, the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has said talks with the US were carried out in a good way, but remains pessimistic towards Washington. He said he was neither optimistic nor pessimistic about how the talks went, but he is pessimistic about America as a negotiating partner. And here is Sky News report for you on that.
Some breaking news to bring you now from Iran. These are quotes from the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who said that the first steps in the talks between the United States and Iran regarding a nuclear agreement were carried out in a good way, adding, though, that he was neither overly optimistic nor pessimistic regarding the nuclear talks between Iran and the US, but remains pessimistic towards Washington itself. This is comments made by the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei to the Student News Network in Iran. And it's worth noting as well that the Ayatollah is the deciding individual in Iran. It's not the politicians or the diplomats that hold the strings of power. It is that man, Ali Khamenei, who is the one that makes the overall decisions in the country. The two sides met in Muscat over the weekend, delegations in separate rooms, the foreign minister of Oman acting as the host and go-between. Short, but it was an opening dialogue and conversation between the two sides. Donald Trump threatening Iran that if decisions and an agreement weren't made, that they should expect repercussions. Well, the Ayatollah says he is neither optimistic nor pessimistic, but we'll bring you more on that as we get it.
And we can bring you the translation of the remarks given by Ayatollah Khamenei, which are on your screen now. We'll read them for you. So this is his immediate reaction after the talks with the US over the weekend. Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, says, regarding talks in Oman, these negotiations are just one of many responsibilities of the foreign ministry. And that's the key point I want to emphasize. The ministry has dozens of duties, and this is only one of them. Don't tie the country's entire fate to these talks. That's my main message. The mistake was made during the JCPOA, which was Obama's agreement, between the US and Iran. The mistake was made during the JCPOA process. Must not be repeated here. Back then, we conditioned everything in the country on the outcome of the negotiations, and that was a mistake. When the whole nation's progress is made contingent on talks, investors pull back, waiting to see how the negotiations end. But these negotiations are just one task among many at the Foreign Ministry. The country must continue its work in industry, agriculture, services, culture, development, and especially in critical areas like the southeast of the country. These matters must be pursued seriously and independently of the ongoing negotiations in Oman. Also, let's neither be overly optimistic nor overly pessimistic about these talks. They're part of a calculated decision and are being carried out accordingly. The initial steps have gone well and moving forward. Things must be followed closely with precision and discipline. The red lines are clear, both for us and for the other side. The talks may succeed or they may not. We're not overly hopeful nor hopeless. As for the other side, we don't trust them and know who we're dealing with. But we have full confidence in our own abilities. We know we're capable. We know how to move strategically, and that's what matters. So you can see there, not necessarily an optimistic reaction from the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, but neither a pessimistic reaction, perhaps a realistic reaction. But the key and important point is that both sides have agreed that the talks should continue. After these talks, there was a reaction from President Trump that was less optimistic than the first one we just played for you, but nevertheless still clear that the direction of travel is to move forward. Trump simply laid a red line, and that red line is that Iran must never be allowed to develop nuclear weapons. That part is something that's already known, is a red line for the US, but Iranian state English language TV news channel called Press TV reacted negatively to that. They've said US President Donald Trump made contradictory remarks and provocative statements about Iran shortly after talks in Oman that both sides called fruitful. Now, the remarks they're talking about, we're going to play them for you. We don't necessarily see them as negative. They are simply restating what the US red lines are. We already know, for example, what the Iranian red lines are. They've made some issues very clear. Their military capabilities are one of them. And on Trump's side, he said, well, that's fine, but you're not going to develop new nuclear capabilities in the military side, though you can have nuclear capacity for civilian means and civilian purposes. But there's nothing new in this. So here is President Trump's reaction after the talks that the Iranians said was contradictory and not necessarily productive. We don't necessarily see it like that. You can see for yourselves.
Yesterday that you're making a decision on Iran very quickly. What do you mean by that? Is that a decision to strike Iran?
Well, their problem very quickly. Iran wants to deal with us, but they don't know how. They really don't know how. We had a meeting with them on Saturday. We have another meeting scheduled next Saturday. I said, that's a long time. You know, that's a long time. So I think they might be tapping us along. But Iran has to get rid of the concept of a nuclear weapon. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. He can't have a nuclear weapon. Nobody can have it. We can't have anybody having nuclear weapons, you know? We can't have nuclear weapons. And I think they're tapping us along because we're so used to dealing with stupid people in this country. And I had Iran perfect. You had no attacks. You would have never had October 7th in Israel, the attack by Hamas. Because Iran was broke. It was stone cold broke when I was president. And I don't want to do it. I want them to be a rich, great nation. The only thing is, one thing, simple. It's really simple. They can't have a nuclear weapon. And they got to go fast. Because they're fairly close to having one. And they're not going to have one. And if we have to do something very harsh, we'll do it. And I'm not doing it for us. I'm doing it for the world. And these are radicalized people, and they cannot have a nuclear weapon.
Does that include a potential strike on Iranian nuclear facilities?
So that sounds harsh. There's President Trump saying, of course, this means the red line that they cannot have nuclear weapons, that if there's no agreement reached, that the US will strike Iranian nuclear facilities. We're not necessarily too concerned with that. We're optimistic that a deal and an agreement will be reached in particular because of remarks made previously by President Trump that the US and Russia themselves, Putin and Trump, have directly agreed to de-escalate their own nuclear weapons. We're going to play you that in just a moment. So those were the US red lines, that there can be no nuclear weapon developed by the Iranian side. The Iranians have their own red lines, and New Rules Geopolitics reports on what some of them may be. Iran is coming, it's on your screens now. Iran is coming into these nuclear talks with steep demands for Trump. Number one, remove sanctions against critical sectors. That's clear. Number two, reconnect Iran to SWIFT. SWIFT is the international payment system that the banks use. You cannot make bank transfers without being reconnected to SWIFT. Somebody pulled the plug. That's, of course, after the talks, the deal between Obama and Iran failed. Trump's administration pulled the plug on Iran's ability to interact in the banking world using SWIFT. Number three, no new sanctions. Number four, snapback clauses in case the US reneges again. That's keeping in mind, of course, Iran is still bitter that Trump withdrew in 2015 from the previous deal that was agreed with Obama. Now, we've stated over the last week, we appeared on Neil Oliver's GB News Online show on this very question of Iran. And we stated there, which we'll restate here again, that this isn't a bilateral conflict between Iran and the US, nor between Iran and Israel. In fact, it's a regional conflict that involves more than two sides. You've got, of course, the US and Iran and Russia and Israel. You've, in addition, got Saudi Arabia. And some of the conflict is between the Saudis and the Iranians. Part of that conflict is between the Iranians and the Israelis. Now, on the parts that the Iranians and the Israelis disagree, such as a Palestinian state, the Saudis agree with the Iranians on. They also support a Palestinian state. But the Saudis and the Israelis agree that the Iranians, for example, need to pull back on what's called the axis of resistance and stop funding these armed militia across the region that are destabilizing not just Israeli interests, but also Saudi Arabia's interests, because, of course, Yemen now gets involved. And the Saudis and the Iranians have just fought a bitter war, proxy war in Yemen, which is Yemen's civil war, but actually a proxy war between the Saudis and the Iranians, which led to horrific deaths, casualties, and starvation in that country. So though the Saudis and the Iranians agree on the need for a Palestinian state, where they disagree with Israel, they disagree with each other over the Yemen conflict. We're in opposing sides of that war, and that's where the Saudis would have more in common with the Israelis than they would with the Iranians. So it becomes a very complicated picture. The US on the one hand backing Israel and Saudi Arabia, Russia and China on the other hand backing Iran, and previously backing Assad's regime in Syria, which has since come to an end. But you can see how complex that picture becomes. And we explain some of this on Neil Oliver's GB News show, which we're just going to play you a clip from now, which we believe will help break this down. And you should have it on your shared screen about now. And that should mean that we are able to play it. And here we go.
Though it is very important that Trump does start negotiations directly with Iran. And the reason that is, if I can preempt perhaps where this conversation is going, the reason why it's so for the Americans to have is because the conflict with Iran isn't just a conflict between Israel and Iran. It's a regional conflict between Israel, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and its Gulf allies, over not just whether or not there should be a Palestinian state, because of course the Saudis and the Iranians agree on that element of it. Netanyahu is the obstacle there. But where the Saudis and the Iranians disagree is over things like Yemen. Now, Yemen, keep in mind, is next door to Saudi Arabia in the Arabian Peninsula. And so it's pretty crucial, a bit like Mexico is to the US, Northern Ireland is to the UK. Yemen is pretty crucial to Saudi Arabia's national security. It sits within the same peninsula as the greater, bigger country, Saudi Arabia. And of course, Iran, via the Houthi militia, has a presence in Yemen. That country's been through a terrible civil war. Saudi and Iran on either end of that proxy war in Yemen. Despite them agreeing on, and they disagree quite viciously, not just on Yemen, prior to that on Syria. Of course, Assad was allied with Iran, and the Saudis were backing the insurgents. That situation has come to a head now, and the Iranian allied, Putin allied regime of Assad has had to flee, and he is now in Moscow. So you can see there are areas of contention between Saudi Arabia and Iran that in some instances are equal to the areas of contention that exist between Iran and Israel. So it's a very complicated geopolitical mosaic, and that's why the bilateral talks between America and Iran are important, because if it were just an Israel-Iran dynamic, it wouldn't actually address the real problem, which is there's a wider regional struggle going on here. Of course, sectarianism, Sunni versus Shia Islamic factions, is an element, but that's insofar as because they are being exacerbated on purpose by geopolitical powers. The real problem is geostrategic. Of course, as with is always the case, people that play divide and conquer games will, they will put salt into the wounds to exacerbate existing sectarian differences, but only to achieve their political aims. So the sectarian issue is relevant, but actually what's more relevant is things like Red Sea ports, which of course the Houthis have been very, very jealous over guarding and preventing access to British and other shipping due to the Israel conflict. But Red Sea ports and other such strategic access to both ports and water supply, which is a crucial issue in the Middle East. And then on top of that, of course, land such as Gaza and on a broader level, Palestine. All of these become issues that become crucial to resolve. And I'll say lastly that the bilateral conversations have some precedent, Neil. If you remember, the US via Qatar had bilateral conversations with the Taliban in Afghanistan, leading to a similar exclusionary process for the Karzai's old Afghanistan regime that wasn't involved in those bilateral talks, and it in the end led to the collapse of Karzai's regime and to the coming to power of the Taliban. And I think these talks are headed in a direction where normalization with Iran is definitely on the table.
So there you see the problem is regional, as we try to explain to Neil Oliver on his GB News show. The problem is regional. These talks cannot but come in the context of that regional problem, despite what the Iranians are saying, that they are going to be limited to nuclear capability and sanctions and lifting the sanctions. It's impossible almost to remove these talks between Iran and the Iranians in Oman from the regional conflict, because both parties, of course, even with each other, are directly involved in that regional conflict. As you can see on your screens now, reported by Dropsite News, the US, as these talks were going on, was bombing Iranian-backed Houthi militia in Yemen. You can see here, at least it says 5 civilians were killed and 13 wounded in a US airstrike on a civilian factory in Bani Matar, a district west of Sana'a, Yemen's health ministry said Saturday. The strike hit the factory in the Matna area. The health ministry said the toll may rise. Now, the important thing here is that those strikes were ongoing. But if you look at this map on your screens now, we mentioned in that clip that this is really a geostrategic problem. And of course, you can see there from where the Red Sea is all those strategic Yemeni ports that are along the coast there with the Red Sea, and that's why we say this is impossible to separate the Iranian conversation with the broader geostrategic issue. Yemen, the Houthis in Yemen have been blockading those ports that you can see in that channel there where the Red Sea comes in from the Arabian Sea. That's a very important shipping route. Of course, it supplies the Mediterranean. British and other ships have been targeted by the Houthis going through that channel into the Red Sea from the Arabian Sea because they've been accused of resupplying Israel. Of course, that leads to Mediterranean ports, which is why those resupply routes were being used. It is a broader issue. It's nearly impossible to be able to separate this from the broader regional conflict, which is why, though, despite what the Iranians are saying, that this is going to be limited to lifting the sanctions and discussing nuclear capability, it won't be. But also, it's why that's good news. It's good news that these talks will be impossible to separate from that regional conflict, because they're part and parcel of what we are saying is the grand regional settlement for peace. And effectively, the Americans have admitted this as well, because they've, as the New York Post reports, which is on your screens now, published 15th of April today, another US aircraft carrier in the Middle East waters ahead of second round of Iran-US nuclear talks. So the Americans themselves aren't decoupling these talks with the regional conflict. In fact, as they're talking to the Iranians, they're sending more and more of their military capability into the region to act as a stick versus the carrot of their negotiations. They are inseparable. That's just how diplomacy works. To read from that New York Post article, you can see on the screens now. Again, this is from the 15th of April. A second US aircraft carrier is operating in Mideast waters ahead of the next round of talks between Iran and the United States over Tehran's rapidly advancing nuclear program. The operation of the USS Carl Vinson and its strike group in the Arabian Sea comes as suspected US airstrikes pounded parts of Yemen controlled by the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels overnight into Tuesday. American officials repeatedly have linked the US month-long campaign against the Houthis under President Donald Trump as a means to pressure Iran in the negotiations. You can see there, almost impossible to separate the talks from the regional conflicts. And we've mentioned that the regional conflict involves more than just the US, Iran, and Israel. Of course, it involves Saudi Arabia. The conflict in Yemen specifically involves Saudi Arabia. Yemen is a key country for Saudi national security. It sits within the Arabian Peninsula, on the peninsula that Saudi Arabia, the larger country, sits. Of course, the Red Sea port is crucial for access for the Saudis as well. Those Red Sea port towns and generally the path into the Red Sea from the Arabian Sea is crucial to Saudi Arabia as well. And the winding down of Yemen's civil war, or the proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia, is also why it will involve the Saudis. Now, the interesting thing here, again, backing up our forecast that we're headed towards a grand regional settlement for peace, is that 2 years ago in 2023, the Saudis conducted their own bilateral talks with the Iranians. That, by all accounts, went very well. And you can see on your screens now, the International Magazine reports Iran and Saudi Arabia's foreign ministers meet in Beijing for the first time in 7 years after China brokered a deal between the two nations. The parties agreed to hold consultations on resuming flights and facilitating the visa issuance process. This was brokered by the Chinese Communist Party, but credit where credit's due. It got the Iranians and the Saudis talking. It got them talking peace. It's a good thing. And we can show you, again, that was from 2 years ago. But here are the foreign ministers of Iran and Saudi Arabia with Chinese, under Chinese moderation, shaking hands after a successful round of peace negotiations in 2023. And with that, it should come as no surprise that the Saudis now have endorsed and welcomed the US-Iranian bilateral negotiations. And this is from the official foreign ministry account of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, KSA, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, MOFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, English. And it states, the foreign ministry expresses Saudi Arabia's welcome of the Sultanate of Oman for hosting talks between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the United States of America, affirming the kingdom's support for these efforts and for adopting dialogue as means to resolve all regional and international disputes. And they published their official letter that carried that statement as well. That's on your screens now. Don't worry, again, we'll publish all these receipts tomorrow. So, of course, the Saudis have responded, welcoming this dialogue, again, demonstrating these are not restricted to Iran's nuclear issue and lifting the sanctions. Even lifting the sanctions, by definition, is a regional issue because it means Iran starts trading again. Who's it going to trade with? The region. So it is impossible to separate these talks from the broader regional conflict, despite the noises coming from the Iranians. The reason the Iranians are saying we're going to restrict these talks to the lifting of sanctions and the nuclear issue is because what they really mean is this isn't about us funding quote unquote, the axis of a resistance against Israel. But that's fine because, again, consistent with our analysis, the Israel-Palestine issue will be left till last. Once MAGA, Trump really leading the MAGA movement, deals with, as they have done, Afghanistan, the war there, Syria, Ukraine, Iran, one hopes as well the Iraqi situation stabilizes. Once they've dealt with all these regional fires and stabilized it all, and Yemen, they will then move to the Israel-Palestine question, because all these other countries, the Saudis, the Iranians, the Syrians, will be in place to support whatever deal is eventually reached. And that's why, again, we say, you see that after these talks, the Iranians immediately went to Russia, a nod to the fact that this conflict is broader than just Israel versus Iran, or indeed the US and Israel versus Iran. It is actually a proxy war involving the global powers, the BRICS nations, Russia and China on the one end, and the US and NATO powers on the other. And that's why you see, as Al Jazeera reports, Iran to consult Russia on US nuclear talks. Rome may host next meeting. The subheading, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi to visit Moscow as US allies seek to avoid being sidelined by Trump. I'll read you an extract from that Al Jazeera article dated yesterday, the 14th of April. Abbas Araghchi, that's the Iranian foreign minister, will visit the Iranian ally Russia later this week, Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said on Monday. The announcement of the trip, during which Araghchi will meet his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov, Moscow said, came as details emerged regarding a second set of talks between Iran and the United States to follow up on an initial meeting over the weekend in Amman. And again, on that element of hopes for a regional settlement, we're going to play you another clip from our conversation with Neil Oliver on his GB News show by, again, once more sharing the screen with you. So here we go. Yes, and Trump, obviously very bellicose, has a slogan, peace through strength, which is actually the best way to make peace is when you're in a position of strength. But let's keep in mind the direction of travel. There are already signs, the writing is already on the wall, that we are moving towards a grand regional settlement for peace, which I write about a lot in my Radical Dispatch via my Substack. And that is that if we look at what's happened prior to this, you can see the direction of travel is headed towards the de-escalation of World War III. And we were at the precipice. It's not just the negotiations between Trump and Putin over Ukraine, which are part of that de-escalation but haven't happened yet. But the ones that have happened, we can already point to. We mentioned Afghanistan. The withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan was negotiated under Trump in his first term. The chaotic way in which it was done, if you remember, happened in the first few months of the Biden administration. And Biden is responsible for making sure that those last-minute preparations didn't end up as terribly as we obviously saw on our cameras, people falling from aeroplanes. But the actual hard graft of the negotiations were done under Trump's first term. So there's an example where Trump's direction of travel has been anti-war and withdrawing troops. And to achieve that, they facilitated dialogue directly with the Taliban in Qatar. But that's not just happened in Afghanistan. We saw that was reciprocated by Russia in Syria. Again, to direction of travel being to de-escalate World War III. The Russians were backing Assad and they are backing Iran. The Russian Navy withdrew from Syria prior to Jolani, now the Prime Minister, Bashar, prior to him marching into Damascus. The Russians had already withdrawn their army without a fight. Upon seeing that, the Iranians took the signal and withdrew support from Assad as well. And that's all documented. It's not in dispute. The Russians pulling their army back is a matter of fact. So you can see there a reciprocation for what the Americans did in Afghanistan. Keep in mind, the Russians were in Afghanistan before the Americans were in the 1980s. So that's next door to key strategic Russian interests in Central Asia, former USSR states, now the Commonwealth of Independent States. So you've got a quid pro quo where I think you can see both sides removing their forces and de-escalating conflict, now talking directly with each other over Ukraine. And it's for that reason that I think that these talks with the bilateral talks with the US and Iran are also going to end in that in a similar pattern. The Russians will not back Iran for a broader World War III style conflict. If there was a war with Iran, it would embroil China and Russia. We'd be back to the precipice of World War III because it's as Syria was for Putin, Iran even more so is a red line for the Russians and the Chinese. They will not allow the physical military occupation of Iran. We saw that they drew that line already in Syria. It happened with Iraq. They drew the line in Syria. That's why we know already, Iran being a much more powerful nation than Syria, they won't allow it to happen to Iran. And that's why for them, it will be a matter of all-out conflict. We know Trump doesn't want that. And that's why there is, as I always say to you, Neil, a lot of cause for optimism here, despite what Netanyahu wants. Netanyahu Indeed, a lot of cause for optimism, and we think the direction of travel is going towards a grand regional settlement for peace. We've explained how Afghanistan indicates that with the US withdrawal from there. The settlement of the Syrian civil war indicates that with the withdrawal by the Russians of their own navy from there without a fight. That led to the Iranians withdrawing their support from Assad. Assad's regime collapsed. The Syrian people took over. That's a situation, of course, much to do there, but the civil war came to an end. Likewise, the negotiations in Ukraine, now Iran, all of this will lead ultimately to the final negotiations, and that's between Israel for a Palestinian state. But that's all part and parcel of this direction of travel. And we mentioned this before, and you can see on your screens there a piece written by us from February 2025. Trump and Putin cancel World War III, label Zelensky a dictator, and send peace envoys to Saudi Arabia to end Ukraine war. And of course, everything we've seen since then only reconfirms our view that there is cause for great optimism. President Trump has been an anti-war president and has remained anti-war consistently from his first term to now, hasn't started any new wars, has instead wound wars down. And of course, no wonder that the globalists are upset with him. No wonder that they seek to portray him as the exact opposite of what he seems to be doing, which is winding the wars down. They are portraying him as a danger to the world, as a cause of instability in the world, when actually, if you look at the track record, and anybody that looks at geopolitics is unable not to come to this conclusion, that wars under Trump have been wound down, not sparked. That Trump has been consistently an anti-war candidate. And that's something that we at Radical Media have been saying for a long time. Now, at the beginning of this stream, we said that even Trump's red line on Iran developing nuclear weapons is something that we believe is achievable, not least because that Putin and Trump themselves have directly bilaterally agreed to de-escalate their own nuclear weapons, to wind their own nuclear programs back. And that is in a process known as nuclear disarmament. And that's a clip we're now going to play for you from a previous Warrior Creed live stream where we went into that with Trump's own video of making this point. And we'll end after this clip. This example is a good note to say that, in fact, we are optimistic and we encourage everybody to remain so. We do think that within our lifetimes, we will see an end, not just a withdrawal from the precipice of World War III, but an end to these proxy wars in the Middle East and a stable and potentially very prosperous up and coming stable Middle East that could well become a light for the world in the future after, of course, all these horrific wars. Once the energy of the people in that region has been completely expired for war, they will want to work towards stability and peace. Have a look at this. Yes, and Trump's obviously very. Sorry, that's not the that's not the clip we wanted to play you. We're going to pull it up for you in just a moment, so bear with us. Hopefully, we've got it. There we are. We're going to share. The idea was to share the screen. So here we go. We're going to share the screen for you, and this will be our concluding clip for you today. Reported in Radical Media. You can see there from the 5th of December 2024, Syria Civil War II, Empire Strikes Back. A quote from that piece there. The truth is that most of the world is essentially exhausted
fighting these proxy wars. A grand regional settlement is inevitable. That was our forecast. It has been for many years, and you can see it there. Again, a grand regional settlement is inevitable. These latest moves in Syria are more likely to be the death throes of various players who are jostling for position before President Trump brings an end to these conflicts. And that is exactly what's happened. And Trump's gone even further, not that you'd hear it in any of your corporatist globalist press, but he's even promised not only to denuclearize the great powers, but to denuclearize them at scale. And you can see on your screens, reported by AB News, there's no ABC News. There's no reason for us to be building brand new nuclear weapons. We already have so many, you could destroy the world 50 times over, 100 times over. President Trump said he talked to Russian President Putin about denuking, adding that the two agreed they would do it in a very big way. And we're going to leave you with that clip. Again, it's on a positive note. Here's President Trump saying they are going to denuclearize the world with Russia and China involved as well. And he's saying, if you listen to this carefully, they've already agreed it all. It's already happening. The rest of the world, led by globalist warhawks, will have no choice but simply to play catch up. This is no longer their world. They are no longer in power. They no longer get to set the terms, and they no longer get to continue to wage permanent war.
Well, I'd like to have that. As soon as things settle down, I'm going to have that conference, primarily with China and Russia, because those are the two that really are out there. And we're going to have them spend a lot less money, and we're going to spend a lot less money. And I know they're going to do it. They agreed to it. We were talking about denuking, denuking. And President Putin and I agreed that we were going to do it in a very big way. There's no reason for us to be building brand new nuclear weapons. We already have so many. You could destroy the world 50 times over, 100 times over. And here we are building new nuclear weapons, and they're building nuclear weapons, and China's building new nuclear weapons. And China's trying to catch up because, you know, they're very substantially behind, but within 5 or 6 years, they'll be even. And we're all spending a lot of money that we could be spending on other things that are actually hopefully much more productive. Hopefully there'll never be a time when we need those weapons. If there's ever a time when we need nuclear weapons, like the kind of weapons that we're building and that Russia has and that China has to a lesser extent, but will have, that's going to be a very sad day. That's going to be...
Congratulations, folks. A grand regional settlement is inevitable. World War III is being cancelled. Peace is on the way. And once we have peace in place and a few Nobel Prizes dished out, we'll see a period of economic prosperity from the stability. And the Middle East will probably turn into the next huge growth area in the world. Exhausted from war as it is, the people will make the effort, 10 times the effort, to sustain the peace because they so freshly know the horrors of war.
That was our forecast back in February. As we hope you can see, we're still on track for the grand regional settlement for peace. In fact, we are ahead in that process, because back when we said that in February, the talks had not yet begun with Iran. Now the talks have begun with Iran. Talks are ongoing with Ukraine. The Syria situation is settled. The Afghanistan situation is settled. We remain hopeful and optimistic that we are headed towards a grand regional settlement for peace and an end to the ever-escalating war. Trump's red line that Iran cannot develop nuclear weapons will be matched with the knowledge that the Russians and the Americans have already agreed to denuclearize their own weapon systems. Of course, that doesn't mean they'll get rid of them. But again, that's not necessarily what the Iranians are demanding either. So we do believe there are ample grounds for agreement. Calm, steady heads need to carry on with these negotiations. They most likely will end positively. That's all we've got time for today on the Warrior Creed live stream. All the receipts from today, as usual, will be published in the written version of this stream that you will be receiving in your inboxes tomorrow via Radical Media. Go to majidnawaz.substack.com to subscribe to Radical Media, and all the premium subscribers gain access not just to the audio-visual version of this podcast, of this stream, but also to other behind-the-scenes content. and content that is for premium members only. We do encourage all of you to become premium members of Radical Media, because without your support, we cannot continue doing this work. Thank you all again. Until next time, you've been watching The Radical, Majid Nawaz.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.